Paul Hudrick, 97.3 ESPN.com. Sixers Insider joins us now. We'll ask him about what he thought about Daryl Morey's first night, really at the helm of the 76ers and how it all went down. Let's start with Paul, who was on the phone with us yesterday, and then as soon as we hung up, we saw they traded Al Horford, man. We were going to call you back, but we figured that you were busy. So let's start there. How did you feel they did with moving Al Horford and what they got back in return? What they got back in return is almost inconsequential.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. I mean, I think if they were just getting off the contract alone, I think was a huge step for Daryl Morey and for this franchise for financial reasons, and then also just to kind of get that taste out of their mouth of how bad it was and kind of the lingering questions and it hanging over their head. For him to just get it taken care of on draft night, I think is huge. And listen, I know there are a lot of people that are kind of down on Danny Green because he did struggle with the Lakers at times last year. But this is a guy who's won 2 championships in a row. He's won 3 in his career. 2 years ago at the Raptors, he was over 45%, I think, from 3. So this is a guy who's played in big moments. He's hit big shots. And if they can get a version of him that's more like the guy 2 years ago, I mean, that's a pretty darn good player. And then again, he's a free agent that can walk at the end of the year, whereas Al Horford, you still would have had to pay for 3 more years. So yeah, I think any scenarios that any of us envisioned where they were going to get something bigger than what they got, I think maybe what it was probably wishful thinking. But I think what he did, and even Terrence Ferguson to me was a guy I really liked coming out in the NBA. He's been up and down. He was a little banged up last year, so you saw his shot go down a little bit, but he's a guy who's 22 years old, so you kind of get another lottery ticket. He's a good defender. So another player, another decent athletic wing you add to the mix. So overall, I think you have to give Daryl Morey a lot of credit for the Horford.
Without the Horford move, he can't make the Josh Richardson move because obviously the years on the contract and the money. So that then allows him to move Richardson, and he gets Seth Curry back in return. He moves the pick and Mitchich out there. So that one was a little bit more interesting because you give up a player like Richardson who's younger but had more years on that deal. He got Curry who gives you 3 years on the deal, but you can't make that deal. Right. So what'd you think of that deal, getting Curry but giving away? You got Richardson back for Butler, so you did value him at one point.
For sure, and I've always been a big Josh Richardson guy. I thought he was going to fit better than he did. It just seems like it never really quite worked out for whatever reason. I mean, obviously, him to Brett Brown, it wasn't a great relationship there. He didn't ever seem to kind of get his bearings. He was banged up a lot as well. So I do think for Dallas, I think he's going to be a better fit there. I think when you look at it, it's all about fit, and that's the one big thing I think the Sixers, if they learned any lesson this past offseason, it's that fit is so important. And when you look at what Seth Curry brings to the Sixers as an elite three-point shooter who can actually dribble the basketball a little bit, play some point guard minutes, and then what Josh Richardson can bring for Dallas, giving them more defense on the wing and at the guard position, that's a trade where I think both teams win because of the fit. And when you talk about them also having to throw in the extra pick, that is a result of the contract. Seth Curry is on a very friendly contract for the next 3 years. Josh Richardson has a player option. He can walk at the end of the year. So that's why you have to throw in that additional pick to make it work. But in the end, I think it's a trade that works out for both teams. Again, a guy, Josh Richardson, to me, who I like, who I think is a pretty good player, but I don't think fit here. And Seth Curry, I think, is a substantially better fit on this team.
Of those two, Green and Curry, do you anticipate either of them being in the starting rotation? And if so, which one would it be? Or do you see a scenario where both are?
I mean, as of right now, obviously we got free agency coming up, so who knows what's going to happen. I mean, could be another trade in the works, or could be another significant middle of exception guy that comes in that could possibly be a starting caliber player. But as of right now, I think you probably have to say they both do, right? I would think your starting lineup is Curry and Green as your backcourt, and then Tobias, Simmons, and Embiid fills out the rest. And that's, I know a lot of people want to look at it as talent, like, oh, well, Al Horford, you paid him all this money. And, Josh Richardson is probably a little bit more versatile and probably a more complete player than Seth Curry. But I'm just going to keep going back to that fit. And Daryl Morey made a point of that yesterday, is that when Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons are surrounded by shooters like they were a few years ago with J.J. Redick and Robert Covington and Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova, all of these guys that can just really shoot and really space the floor, that was when they were at their best. So all of these moves, I think, are going to take Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons to another level. And let's be real, the Sixers aren't going anywhere unless both of those guys elevate their games. And I think these moves help that happen.
Paul Hudrick, 97.3 ESPN.com. And, of course, you can read his thoughts on the first-round pick over on our website. But we'll get them verbally from you now because you were tweeting last night. You wanted Maxey, and you ended up getting him. So why did you like Maxey, Tyrese Maxey, and what does he bring to this team? Because there were a lot of people who liked Maxey but said, oh, man, he doesn't shoot all that well. They wanted a shooter. But why, in your mind, was Maxey the pick at 21?
It's funny because I wrote that piece right before the draft saying 8 guys I liked. I didn't even include Maxey on that because I didn't think there was any chance he was going to fall to 21 because I valued him that high. I thought he was going to be a lottery pick, if not just outside of it. And that's, to me, that's the reason you pull the trigger on this draft pick, because of the value is just so good. When you look at what Maxey can do overall as, a guy who can create off the dribble a little bit, a guy who's really good finishing at the rim. I think he's got potential to be a really good defender, can guard ones and twos. I know he's mentioned like a guy, Drew Holiday is a guy that he's looked up to, and if he can replicate a little bit of what Drew Holiday has become defensively, that would be huge for the Sixers. And when you talk about the shooting, he's 83% from the line, so that's encouraging. I don't think the shot is broken. I think the form is there. And he talked to us today, and he said, how much work he's been putting in, something like 750 to 800 shots a day he's putting up, makes. He said he has to make 750 to 800 a day in his workout. So he knows the deal. He knows that he's not going to see the floor if he's not making shots around Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. But what I think too is, as much as shooters were a priority, and absolutely they were, and Daryl Morey has shown that they are, shot creation is huge, and he brings that. He's going to be able to operate in a pick and roll. He's going to be able to attack the rim and finish at the rim. And those are things this team also sorely lacked. So adding him to the mix and then getting more shooting, and again, getting an Isaiah Joe in the second round, I think that's a really good way to go about it. I just think the value was too good for Tyrese Maxey. Plus, I think maybe the shooting concerns could get tad overblown. He might actually wind up being a decent shooter at the next level.
I've kind of described him as the guy that they wished Fultz was, who can combo guard, can handle the ball, create his own shot. Probably not as good as a shooter, obviously, as Fultz was coming out of Washington, but has 3 levels of the game. One big difference, and Fultz wasn't the worst defensive player in the world, but this guy here prides himself in defense. And you mentioned, he said, how do you pattern your game? He mentioned C.J. McCollum, Drew Holiday, and then he went back to Holiday when he said defense. And I learned that from watching Drew Holiday. This is a guy who takes pride in his defense, and him and Ben on the perimeter could be a nice pairing.
Absolutely. And that's his other thing is you have a team that, say what you want, they clearly Ben Simmons has his weaknesses, but the guy prides himself in defense. Joel Embiid is a guy who prides himself on his defense. So this will be a team, I think, that, they're going to be a team that holds themselves accountable on that end of the floor. And Doc Rivers even said it last night. I think they're going to still be one of the better defensive teams in the NBA. This just makes them more versatile. And if Maxey, if he's modeling his game after Drew Holiday has become, to me, if not the best defensive guard in the NBA, one of the best defensive guards in the NBA. The fact that I don't think he made the first team this year, which to me is a total snub. He's an excellent defensive player, and I see Maxey having that potential. He's 6'3", but he's got a long wingspan. And as you mentioned, when you watch him at Kentucky, he wanted it. There was that desire, and that's most of the battle for guys on defense is that desire, and then also having that athleticism. And I think he's got both in speed.
Paul, we got about a minute or so, but I think you liked Paul Reed. We had him on earlier, and you talk about comparisons. He said he compared his game to Pascal Siakam and Jeremy Grant. That would be pretty nice.
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote a kind of scouting report on him a while back, and Jeremy Grant was one of the people I referenced, and I could totally see it. When you look at his size, his length, his weak side shot blocking, his ability to kind of switch 1 through 5, the shot it was a little inconsistent. It looks a little funky, but I think there's potential there. He's got some offensive game. He's got really good touch around the rim. So, yeah, I'm 100%. I think this guy at 58, the value you're getting, and even Daryl Morey again said it last night, this guy is super underrated in our eyes. And he was a guy I really liked. I thought he would have been in play in the late 30s, early 40s. To get him at 58, I think is tremendous value. And I am really intrigued to see what they're going to do with him and how they're going to use him and just how his defensive versatility is going to translate to the next level.
Well, you guys did a great job last night, and the fact that you stayed up for Morey's press conference, I applaud you because I could not go any longer. I woke up and watched it this morning, and then, of course, you can read more about it at 973ESPN.com. Paul Hudrick covers the 76ers. It should be fun. Free agency opens. We'll be talking to Paul a lot during the next couple of weeks, and then the season starts on the 22nd of December. Paul, take care, pal.
You too, Mike. Thanks, man.
All right, Paul Hudrick, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.